Hello and welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Liu Xin. In this series, I dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to make up for the missing, sometimes deliberately, pieces of the puzzle. So join me in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Weibo, or WeChat. We live stream Headline Buster at 11 a.m. Beijing time on Thursdays and air the segment on TV at 11:30 on Fridays. So do join me during the live streaming and get in touch. I would love to receive and possibly read out your insightful comments. A butterfly flapping its wings in a big void. Now, can you picture that in your head? What an exercise in futility. Some are comparing this to the endeavor by a group of developing countries to synchronize their efforts towards greater growth and a bigger say in the world. By that, I mean the BRICS. You should know by now what I mean. This week, South Africa is hosting a major in-person summit in Johannesburg, the first in 3 years, where leaders of 1/3 of the world's economy and 2/5 of its population are meeting. Keywords: Africa, growth, sustainability, inclusivity, and multilateralism. Now, a total of 67 developing countries in Africa and beyond have been invited. This group came into being as early as in 2009, when the world was reeling from the global financial crisis. Western governments and central bankers were running around like a headless chicken without having the slightest idea what has just happened and how to clean up the mess. But 4 emerging economies stood out with their steady growth and great potential. They were Brazil, Russia, India, and China, giving rise to the term BRIC. They held their first summit in Russia in 2009. Within a year, South Africa joined. Now, it's plural, BRICS. The interest in the media towards the BRICS has always been non-existent. Last year, when we covered the topic, we had difficulty finding materials to critique. The pathetic few articles mocked the group rather than report on it. A disparate quintet, a motley crew, or an odd grouping, to put it politely. That, however, dramatically changed this year, as suddenly there seems to be a burst of interest, hence the scramble to make up the void. No wonder the latest installment of The Economist asking, what is the point of the BRICS? 14 years later, what is the point of the BRICS? It's like asking a 14-year-old boy, who are you? Where do you come from? What's the point of your existence? Let me share some facts for the latecomers. The BRICS is bigger than you think. Its share in the global economy nearly doubled since 1995 to reach 32% in purchasing parity terms. If you don't understand that, look it up. Yet, as of 2022, their combined voting rights in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are only still 14% each. Something has to be done. Now, this year's BRICS Summit comes at a juncture. In his address, Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for deeper cooperation in business, finance, and security to promote development and peace. He also calls for more people-to-people exchanges and mutual learning between civilizations. Improving global governance is, of course, also important. But look into the media reports around you. It's the same old boring stuff. They focus primarily on 3 aspects. Now, highlighting division over unity among the BRICS, twisting China's role and influence in the group, and depicting the BRICS as a threat to the current world order. But as the saying goes, the lady does protest too much, methinks. What do I mean? How exactly do the mainstream media cover the summit? Well, a New York Times article rightly points out BRICS meeting attracts global interest not seen in years. Not seen in the West in years, by the way. But sudden awakening anyway. However, that doesn't necessarily mean a sober mind. If you were expecting positive reporting complete with bells and whistles, you'd be disappointed. Remember the motley crew analogy of the BRICS? It's apples and oranges by the looks of it, a buffet of different systems and ideologies with different levels of development on different continents and sometimes at odds on geopolitics. There are fault lines between members, and the conflict in Ukraine puts some members in an awkward position. This, however, led to a columnist at Reuters to suggest disbanding the BRICS. Developing countries can benefit from playing one superpower off against the other, it writes. Other countries won't want to be equal distance from the two superpowers, claims the column. What the article forgets to mention that there is a third way, working together to tackle common problems such as climate change or economic and financial instability. A good example is the creation in 2015 of the New Development Bank, or what many people call the BRICS Bank, as an alternative to traditional institutions such as the World Bank. The BRICS have also set up the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, a special tool to protect them from financial instability and currency speculation. Because of obvious differences, the BRICS is not a clique. Member countries accommodate their differences while working together. That's probably why the group is so fascinating. As a matter of fact, as we speak, more than 20 countries have formally applied to join, including Argentina, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Iran, Venezuela, so on and so forth. As Erastus Moencha, a former deputy chairperson of the African Union Commission, puts it, this BRICS brings the best out of countries that may not agree on every item on the agenda, but when it comes to matters of mutual interest, they set aside their differences and stand together. India's External Affairs Ministry spokesperson was quoted to have said that India has approached the issue of BRICS enlargement, one of the important talking points, with a very positive mind and positive framework. He rejected insinuations from Western think tanks such as the Lowy Institute or the Atlantic Council that India is against enlargement, so nothing to write home about here. The second common theme in BRICS-related reporting is China. According to the Reuters, the BRICS nations are meeting to seek to blunt Western dominance. China, it writes, seeking to expand its geopolitical influence as it tussles with the United States, wants to enlarge BRICS quickly, while some other members may not disagree. Here we go again. China, the usual suspect. Let's be clear. The problem for the West is the C in BRICS. Let's look into this a bit more closely. An opinion piece published on August the 17th in the South China Morning Post tells you China's overwhelming dominance is jeopardizing not just the expansion plans, but the very existence of the group. At the root of the club's lack for cohesion, says the article, is the overwhelming dominance of China, and the only BRICS member that has made meaningful progress in converging with the developed world by becoming a knowledge-based and data-driven economy. Who said the BRICS should become an exclusive club of poor countries? The fact that China continues to pursue economic globalization and make progress should be welcomed, not just by the developed world, but by developing emerging economies too, for obvious reasons. And how much cohesion is there among the US-led West? Before we try to sow the seeds of resentment here, maybe we should examine the Western club first. It gets worse in this piece from the Financial Times published end of July. It says that BRICS nations risk becoming satellites of China. Nice try, very vivid imagery. The developing world revolving around China. India will tell you not to speak for them. In fact, the 24 applicant countries will tell you not to speak for them. Be a little bit respectful. They know what they're doing. But for some other media, the gloves are off and it's no holds barred. China is leading the charge, as the Financial Times suggested on the eve of the summit in Johannesburg. This article declares that China's intention is for BRICS to become geopolitical rival to G7, and it will even push the BRICS bloc of emerging markets to become a full-scale rival to the G7. Very imaginative and flattering too that China could have such kind of sway. So does the BRICS resort to some sort of Machiavellian tactics in order to get ahead and challenge or even bring down the West? Remember Blackadder? Looks more like Baudrick's cunning plan to me. Tongues have been wagging for years now. De-dollarizing is in the air. In a macabre replay of the death by 1,000 cuts, weaning emerging and developing countries of their dependence on the US dollar could be a cut too far. So is a de-dollarization moment finally here, as foreign policy asks? The article reckons that the dollar's reign isn't likely to end overnight, but a common BRICS currency would begin the slow erosion of the dollar's dominance. Jim O'Neill, the man who coined the BRICS term originally, however, rejects the idea, saying it's ridiculous in an interview earlier this month. None of these things will ever happen until those BRICS countries want to have their currencies used by people in other parts of the world, he's reportedly saying. Mr. O'Neill may think it's ridiculous, but I beg to differ. Given how the US weaponizes the dollar and how they abuses it against countries they don't like, you'd be an idiot not to want another currency as an option. The topic may be off the table this time, but never say never. So for those who don't understand it yet, what's the point of the BRICS? Who are you? Where do you come from? And where are you going? Are Western media just missing the point and making a mountain out of a molehill? Or is it just that the BRICS, by expanding and drawing more countries, are pointing the way to a new kind of grouping that breaks away with the small circle mindset that still prevails in the West? Interestingly enough, even French President Emmanuel Macron expressed great interest in attending the BRICS Summit. That's a sign the wheels are turning. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, my guests will join me to discuss the details of this topic. They include Professor Jiang Gong from China, Mr. Charles Okekuku Onunaju from Nigeria, Gerd Johannes Grobler from South Africa, and Klaus Lares joining us from the United States. Do stay with me.
I'm at the BRICS Trade Fair. It was opened by South Africa's Trade and Industry Minister, Ibrahim Patel.
You'll see a number of products. You'll see cars and taxis and buses and three-wheelers that are made here on the African continent. You'll see here also not only a showcase of South African industrial capability, but also of 19 other African countries.
There's several very interesting exhibitions here, and I've come across this interesting concept. Alfred, tell us about it.
So this is the Melo van. It's 100% electric, and we specifically designed it for last mile delivery. That wasn't the original case. We started off as a passenger carriage, actually, hence why it's called Melo cabs and now being called Melo vans.
The fair is an exciting display of what Africa has to offer, the latest in technology, medical and transport innovation, and everyday products.
The BRICS allows for us to tap into different spaces that we usually wouldn't be open to. We're able to meet people from different backgrounds with different ideas.
This opportunity that has been given for networking, we hope African countries can partner and work together for sustainable growth.
It also brings opportunities for African businesses entering an era of industrialization and growth through the Continental Free Trade Agreement.
As a company that is in the area of deploying Wi-Fi to underprivileged communities, equipment for me is a big one. So I'm attending one of the sessions where Huawei is speaking, because we have to find cheaper ways of production to ensure that we reduce our costs, and so that we can roll out to as many communities as possible.
I think the opportunities for growth, opportunities for both women, but also the lessons coming from the COVID-19, that there's a different way and different shift to grow each other's economies and take advantage of what we each bring to the party.
South Africa does $80 billion worth of trade with the BRICS nations. There's now a push to extend that beyond its borders to its neighbours and others on the continent. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN, see the difference. Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point. Welcome back to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point, with me coming to you from Beijing. My guests are, I'm very pleased to introduce them to you, Professor Klaus Larus, who is History and International Affairs Professor from University of North Carolina, Chapel, who is joining us from North Carolina. Hello, Mr. Professor Larus. Good to have you on the show. Hello. As always. Yeah, joining us from South Africa, Gert Johannes Grobler, who is a former senior diplomat of South Africa. He's joining us from Pretoria, South Africa. Mr. Grobler, good to have you again. And Professor Zhang Gong, who is Vice President of Research and Strategy from the University of International Business and Economics, Israel. He's joining us from China, I believe. And we also have our fourth guest, Charles Okechukwu Onu-Naidu, who is Director of the Center for China Studies of Nigeria, one of the countries aspiring to join the BRICS. He is joining us from Nigeria. And Mr. Onu-Naidu, thank you very much for joining us. So, Mr. Grobler, let me go to you first, as you are in South Africa, the place where everything is happening. I don't know whether you read that article or not about what is the point of the BRICS. What is your, to me, that says a little bit about how the liberal media is covering the grouping that's important to developing countries, and increasingly. What would be your answer to this vitriolic snipe to BRICS?
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. And I was just saying that I attended some of the BRICS meetings yesterday. I will be going there again today. And there has been a very upbeat, a very positive mood here in South Africa hosting BRICS, because it was very evident yesterday, amongst others from the business forum, the BRICS Business Forum, that BRICS is a catalyst for positive change in our polarized world. And it's therefore not surprising that so many global South countries identifies with the values, the vision espoused by BRICS. And this is evident in the significant number of countries who now are appealing or wanting to join BRICS. Now, yesterday, the BRICS leaders in some of the meetings I attended have reaffirmed their commitment to a multipolar world as the only way or the best way to address the common challenges that humanity faces, and that through international cooperation. And I must say, the comment by the Economist is typical of what you see from the Western media. But it was very interesting yesterday. There was an article that appeared over the weekend in a very reputable London newspaper called the London Observer. And I would like to quote from that because I think that sort of summarizes the current geopolitical situation. I'll quote it quickly. It says, quote, "If it sounds like a Cold War and it looks like a Cold War, then it probably is a new Cold War." And it says, and it poses this very important question: what other interpretation is there to be placed on the US President Biden's latest and ongoing ramping up of diplomatic, economic, and military pressure on China? And this while at the BRICS at the moment, and I'm sure in the communique tomorrow, there will be a very strong emphasis on creating a better, fair, a more balanced world, and with a strong emphasis on international cooperation. So the Economist, I mean, I read it regularly, comment is totally inappropriate.
Mr. Grobler, let me follow up very quickly because you made some very interesting points. And one of the things that people base their dismissiveness on is that it seems that, you know, after 14 years of being in existence, this group has not made huge splashes, you know, in the international scene. How would you answer that? What has this group achieved concretely over the past 14 years? I mean, I have mentioned the share of the BRICS economy has almost doubled in its importance to the global economy. But as a group, what tangible things can we point to now we're looking at it 14 years after his birth?
One looks at if you look at the communiques of the BRICS summits over the last number of years, there has been constructive decisions taken on, first of all, the attention on the global south, to create a better world, to create, as I said, a more just and equitable world. And that still remains the key focus of BRICS. And I am sure that if one looks at from what I've heard, what is happening, we are probably going to see, whether it's in the field I mean, BRICS is such a multifaceted, multi-sectorial organization. And if you look at the number of meetings, but not only meetings, but decisions that have been taken, and one would need time to unpack all of this, whether it's in the field of a trade, investment, whether it's health, whether it's digital. There are umpteenth number of mechanisms. And in fact, this year, as was the case last year in China, there were more than 200 meetings of BRICS mechanisms, which all took concrete, tangible decisions. So I am sure that if we leave the summit later this week, we will see further concrete, practical and implementable plans to strengthen not only global South-South cooperation, but also BRICS Africa partnership. And that's very important for
Yes.
us here in Africa.
Yeah. Speaking of BRICS Africa cooperation, we have a representative from one Africa country who is very interested in joining the BRICS, and let's get their perspective. Mr. Ono Naidu joining us from Nigeria. So tell us a bit, what do people in Nigeria think of BRICS, and why is Nigeria interested to be part of it?
Thank you. Thank you for the privilege to be on the point, a very unique platform to advance a discourse on a global scale. Let me assure you that Nigerian Vice President, Mr. Shetima, is currently in South Africa to advance Nigerian desire to join the BRICS and participate in the process. For us in Nigeria here, right even before this summit, there has been quite a lot of discourse, written articles written in several leading Nigerian newspapers by several well-known Nigerian figures, demanding that the country take its place in BRICS, insisting that Nigeria should go in that direction. So there has been a popular understanding among Nigerians that Nigeria should get involved in the BRICS mechanism and make contribution, and as well engage the opportunities provided by BRICS. So I can assure you that there is a groundswell of positive view of BRICS among Nigerians.
What kind of opportunities are Nigerians looking into specifically?
Yes, of course, like we have basically economic, essentially economic, and of course political. First and foremost, Nigeria has challenge of economy, especially the monocultural economy of dominant production of commodities. So, of course, the BRICS will offer us a serious opening in terms of economic diversification. Economic diversification has been a key theme, has been a major theme of Nigerian economic construction for several decades, breaking out from essential export of commodities, natural commodities,
right,
especially oil, been a huge distortion. So the idea of BRICS is something people thought is going to give us a broader market, and it will also open us up to inflow of investment from diverse sources, and especially, as you know, China is a critical strategic partner for Nigeria, and other countries in the BRICS are also a very important destination for
before
inflow
I forget,
of investment.
Yeah, before I forget, I do want to give each of my tests equal amount of time to address the forum, but I do want to follow up with one more question. And Mr. Ono Naidu, why not enhancing your trip with the G7, with the developed countries, which can buy more of your products? Why the developing countries, which have limited purchasing power or consumer capacity, let's say? Very short, please.
Well, you may wish to know that in the past 50 years or so of post-independent Nigeria, the structural nature of our economy, which is tied to the West, has generated a lot of distortions. And like I told you, has simply boxed us into producing only commodities, and which has not helped the economy. We have this stranglehold of commodity economy, especially export of oil, which takes in almost 97% of our foreign exchange receipts. So there is a challenge to diversify this. And the structural nature, the traditional structure of international economy in which Nigeria was integrated has not enabled us to fully exploit the opportunity of diversifying the economy. So I think BRICS offers this essentially, basically, the idea of diversification of Nigerian economy, especially exposing, moving up to the industrial chain, and getting involved in the industrial chain is a critical factor in Nigeria aspiring to join the BRICS. And most of the article,
Yeah, thank you very much. Professor Laras, let me go to you. You are the representative of the Western narrative here, but please disagree if you wish to. The question really is, a lot of these reports are saying, look, this bloc is trying to bring down the Western dominance, or they're trying to disrupt or challenge the current world order that's dominated by the West. But my question really is, why shouldn't the West's dominance be challenged?
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the question. It's a pleasure to represent the entire Western world here, which I'm unable to do. Let me first say it is an important meeting which is taking place. Clearly, a lot of business will be conducted, a lot of political discussions will take place, not least about the Ukraine war and how possibly to overcome it. We know that South Africa and China, for example, want to put themselves forward as mediators to bring an end to this terrible war. But I would like to say that the expansion of an organization, and that is of course the intention of the BRICS meeting, or one of the intentions, does not necessarily lead to its success. When you look at the European Union with its 27 members now, that hasn't always made life more successful or easier for the participating states. And then also what we see in the media...
What do you base your doubts on? Why do you think it's not a short result?
No, that's because now you have 5 members. They can relatively easily communicate with each other and talk to each other despite certain tension, for example, between India and China. But it is easier to discuss things among 5 members than among 10 or among 20 members. This makes life simply more complicated. Look at the United Nations, for example, at the General Assembly. Look at also, partially at least, at the European Union with 27 members. It simply is more complex and needs a greater effort. But what I do notice in the international media and elsewhere is that bloc thinking, that the BRICS are competing with the G7 and the G7 are worried about the BRICS meeting. And I think that is the wrong approach. There is no harm in having the BRICS meeting and having another organization which hopefully brings economic development to the global south and perhaps other parts of the world. So I think that thinking in competition between the G7 and BRICS is really misplaced. Both blocs, if you call them blocs, both organizations should really try to cooperate with each other for the sake of the global south and of course for other countries as well. And that, I think, should be one of the objectives of the current BRICS meeting, to perhaps reach out to the G7 and find common ground and common cooperation to the benefit, in the last resort, to all of us.
Do you think, even if the BRICS would reach out to the G7, do you think they would be met with open arms? Or do you think right now, you know, in the current atmosphere, as Mr. Grobler described, do you think it is possible?
No, absolutely. I think Russia is, of course, a big problem case. You know, it's very difficult to reach out to Putin, who's conducting a terrible, aggressive war on Ukraine. There's lots of war crimes being committed and so on and so on. But there are close connections between South Africa, for example, and the Western world. There are close connections between India and also between China and the Western world, despite all tension which we heard about before China and Western world. There are also many, many contexts still, and they should be strengthened and improved upon. They should not be further made more difficult.
Professor Gong, finally, it's your turn. What is the biggest point you want to address at this moment? You've heard so much.
I will start by addressing the initial question you asked at the very beginning of the program. What's the point of BRICS? Certainly, BRICS is a political organization designed to counter the weight and the condescending arrogance, in my view, towards the global south. It's a place where the global south, the developing countries, the emerging market economies can get together to voice their opinion regarding global matters. I think the fundamental answer lies in South Africa President Ramaphosa's speech. He specifically said that developing countries are not going to be bullied by the West to side with a certain political position. I think that speaks to volume about the current situation between the South and the North. But other than that, I would say the comparison between G7 and BRICS is probably not that appropriate, because BRICS is fundamentally about a non-alignment cause. It's a partnership. It's not a alliance, versus the G7 is a total alliance. I mean, they synchronize things on a range of political, even defense issues. And also, I want to also add another point. BRICS is more than just a talking place. BRICS has a functioning bank called New Development Bank under the directive of the BRICS. It has made, if I remember this correctly, $33 billion of loan to many developing countries for economic development. So clearly, another very interesting and also very important mission of the BRICS is for economic development. Also again, in President Ramaphosa's speech, he specifically called for total transformation of the international financial institutions. We talk about making these loans to the developing world without conditions, exactly as the new development bank has been doing,
right,
and exactly opposite to what organizations like the IMF and the World Bank have been doing. So I think if you look at the economic agenda of BRICS, the political agenda of the BRICS, there's an entire reason why this should exist. So in that regard, I totally reject the article you cited by economists. It doesn't sync up with the reality at all.
And it doesn't speak up with the status of the publication, looked up upon by so many people around the world. I don't have much time left. I didn't use my time wisely, I guess. But I want to go back to my Nigerian guest for a very quick question and then one statement from each of the rest of you. Mr. Onunaidu, what do countries such as Nigeria think of the hyped risks that by joining BRICS, you might become, say, a satellite of China or a member of the fan club of China? What do you think of that?
Yes, I'll show you something that in Nigeria, there is a clear understanding that China is the internal structure, the nature and structure of China, contemporary state has have no any element of bullying, has no element of traditional imperialist state that we have known in the past. So I think there is a clear understanding here that we are dealing with a state with a different nature, historical background and different nature,
okay,
whose activities we can understand within the international system. But essentially, let me tell you, we have challenges, the excruciating debt burden arising from our debt being denominated in US dollars. The stranglehold of the US dollars is ruining small-scale businesses, driving the country to bankruptcy, driving small businesses to bankruptcy. There is a general feeling that we need to engage the opportunities of several baskets of international currency. These are some of the traditional challenges. These are some of the challenges we have tied to the traditional structure of Western-dominated economy. So the BRICS offers a way out. The BRICS offers a scope of fresh air into Nigeria getting on a fresh start. And more important, like you may know, countries like Nigeria, we are never apart in designing the framework of the existing international financial architecture dominated by Western. Like you know, the IMF is alternated between either an European president, the IMF and World Bank is dominated by either European president or American president. So I think this for us means getting engaged with drafting the essential framework of international financial architecture. So being at the table, having your imprint at the table for us is a good start. And BRICS offers that kind of historic starting point for us. And that for me is an essential aspect of Nigerian vision to become part of BRICS. And not just Nigeria, but several African countries and developing countries.
Thank you. Mr. Grobler, what is your reaction to the doubt that when the group becomes bigger, it's more difficult to come to consensus and take actions?
No, BRICS, as I mentioned before, and some of the other commentators also mentioned, has really accomplished a lot in terms of economic development, general development, health, and so forth. So that will continue. The expansion of BRICS is a a fact. It's something that's going to happen. We will have to see what comes out of the meeting tomorrow, that they will have to look at the criteria and conditions and so on for admission. There are various models on the table, but I do not have a problem with the expansion of BRICS in the sense that we have a massive a number of people. 70 to 80% of the world population belongs to the developing world. And the role of BRICS is to create a role and extend the voice of the developing world. And in that sense, and of course, I think the BRICS expansion will be done probably in a phased manner. It will be done in a gradual manner. It's not that you're going to have 40 countries being part of BRICS. It's going to be a well-planned, well-organized, phased-in expansion.
Okay.
But in the end, BRICS will be better equipped to deal with the kind of problems that the world, the developing world, is experiencing, and mention was made of the need to restructure the international multilateral order, whether it's the UN, whether it's the World Bank, the IMF, all those things. And that will be the main focus of BRICS as we move forward.
Professor Laras, do you think the West has a lesson to learn in how they neglected the BRICS for years, and all of a sudden realizing that it's a full-grown boy, 14-year-old?
Well, definitely. I mean, the West did neglect Africa, for example, also South America. They woke up to the fact that they did so when other countries, for example, China and also Russia, moved into these continents and created lots of working relationships, lots of friendships, lots of influence and power base there. And that, of course, woke up the West, said, oh, we overlooked these continents. And that was a good thing, because neglecting Africa and South America, for example, was certainly not something to be proud of. But the West has been made aware of that, is trying to catch up. And whether the BRICS is already fully grown up, we will see. You know, and whether the
a robust, hot-blooded teenager.
whether the extension of BRICS will lead to something positive, we will also see. I think the proof is in the results. And if the results are positive, if it really leads to a lot of more economic development of the global South, then I think it was the right thing to do. But it really needs to be proven. So far, we talk about expansion, what it might bring about, what the result might be. We want to see the results, hopefully, in a few years, and not in 10 or 20 years, but in the next few years.
Okay. Professor Gong, finally to you. People would say we have the United Nations. We have already many, many international organizations, including ones grouping developing countries. Why is BRICS special? And also to Professor Laras' question, how can we prove to the world that BRICS can make a difference?
Well, I think BRICS is unique, as I said, more than just a talking place. You know, it's a place where actions are taking place. I think for most African countries, as well as developing countries, the economic development is the first priority. In that regard, BRICS, ACA, the NDB, the New Development Bank, have already taken actions. As a matter of fact,
what sets it apart from regional organizations with developing countries? For instance, the African Union. We have African Free Trade Agreement as well. You know, various mechanisms to group developing countries. But what is special about BRICS? Is it transcontinental? Is it because of its differences?
Exactly. It transcends geographic boundaries. It represents the voice of the global South. Represents Africa, represents South America, represents many developing countries in Asia, the Arab world as well. Reportedly, Saudi Arabia is very much interested in this. There's got to be a more of a voice in consensus developed from that very large block of the world in countering the influence, in countering the total dominance of these developed countries, the G7, for example, the 7 richest countries.
We have to.
Making orders.
We have to leave it there. No wonder the West is paranoid, is afraid at this moment that BRICS may grow too fast, too strong. We have to leave it there. Hard work is in the details and in unity. Many thanks to my guests, Professor Zhang Gong, Vice President of Research and Strategy of the University of International Business and Economics, Israel, Charles Okwechukwu Onu-Naiju, Director of Center for China Studies of Nigeria, Gerd Johannes Grobler, a former senior diplomat from South Africa, and Professor Klaus Laris, History and International Affairs Professor from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point and this edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. Thanks for watching. On behalf of the whole team, you've got The Point.